Funding for Colores was provided in part by Frederick Hammersley Foundation. This time on Colores. We bring you a special evening with one of New Mexico's most renowned filmmakers, Godfrey Reggio. We begin with an in-depth interview with Reggio, who created the internationally acclaimed film, Koyaanisqatsi.
We live in a world more real than true. So I wanted to make an effort to make a film more true than real.
In the interview, Reggio shares his vision for the making of this film and his provocative philosophy behind the legendary Qatsi film trilogy.
Since we see the world through language, maybe we can adopt another way of looking at it through languages that do see the world in which we live in.
Following the interview, New Mexico PBS will broadcast Reggio's groundbreaking and visionary film, Koyaanisqatsi, in its entirety. It's all ahead on Colores.
The first time I saw New Mexico filmmaker Godfrey Reggio's acclaimed film Koyaanisqatsi in 1983, I thought to myself that I'd finally seen a work of art arising from my own era and my own world that matched the sense of dire reality that I shared unspoken with many others. The film itself is wordless. It doesn't tell you anything, but rather gifts you with experience. Koyaanisqatsi is a Hopi Pueblo word. Qatsi means life, and Koyaanis means crazy, out of balance, a crazy life, teetering for a fall. Godfrey Reggio has created a different kind of film. He manipulates time to submerge the audience in a cinematic experience, changing the way we see the world. Koyaanisqatsi contains a profound prophetic message about how we live on Earth, as relevant today as it was when the film first came out 33 years ago. But the thing that I was really interested in as a cultural anthropologist is how you fixed on that word, Koyaanisqatsi, and those three words in the Qatsi trilogy.
The actual situation is I didn't want a word for the name of the film. I wanted to have an image because we're dealing with not a written script, we're not dealing with text, we're dealing with texture, we're not coming from literature, we're coming from visualization. So it's a visual composition, it's a visual form. Now that's different than what you would find in traditional cinema, which tells you a story. I wanted to have a visual as the title for the film, and I had such a visual. But at the end of the day, I was persuaded that that would kill the film. Nobody would know what to say. And so I said, okay, we'll let that go. Having said that, I wanted to find a word that had no cultural baggage. So what I did was, you mentioned anthropology. I'm not an intellectual, or meaning have big degrees or anything, but I did go to a funky, beautiful small college, and I learned that if you're studying, say, ethnology, the department uses the professor and the book's own subjective categories to analyze indigenous peoples. So that, you know, I can't blame them. I mean, that's the limit of what they can do. So I said, how interesting it would be to take the subjective category of indigenous peoples and have them analyze Bahana or white people or the bigger culture. And so with a professor at the University of Arizona in Flagstaff, Eckhart Malotki, I said, I'm looking for a word, and then I describe what I'm looking for, a world that's completely upside down, where the moment of the truth is the moment of the false, where everything that seems normal is, at least from the point of view of this film, itself abnormal. Anyway, I found this word, Koyaanisqatsi. It's an ancient word. It's a compound word. Qatsi means life. Koyaanis means crazy, turmoil, in conflict. Fundamentally, what that word means is a way of life that calls for another way of living. And that, to me, is profound. The perspicacity, the clarity, the insight of these people watching us for centuries, literally, is worth us taking a look at. Now, this film is not about Hopis. It's about using their term, which no one knew, including many of the Hopis, okay? That's not to say some Hopis didn't know it. I had to get permission. I went through the equivalent of a theological examination. My mentors were David Monange and Mina Lanza. Mina Lanza was a very important clan leader in Oloriabi, and David was a healer and a clan leader and a possessor of the prophecies of the Hopis to the outside world. And they backed me and brought me to another village where their Kikmungwe, or their elders, wanted to examine, where did I get this word? What do you think it means? I felt like I was at university trying to get a dissertation. So that Mina Lanza stood up for me. She was a very important woman at that moment. And David, who was controversial but important, and they gave me permission to use the word. When a trilogy came up, I wanted two other words that, in compound with Qatsi, could describe or give an offering, a point of view to the film. So Powakatsi is a black magician that consumes the life of another person in order to support her own or his own life. So it operates through allurement and seduction. And I said, what a better metaphor or point of view or even parable for the relationship between Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere countries in the film Powakatsi. So first film, Northern Hemisphere, hyper-industrial grids, societies, technology, Koyaanisqatsi. Second film, Powakatsi, cultures of orality, cultures of tradition, of simplicity, handmade life. And then Nakoikatsi, all together, all at once, the global world in which we live, the world where the image is more real than reality. So that, usually when I make a film, the locations are everything, because the locations are like characters in the film that I try, in the films that I make. And in the case of Nakoikatsi, the location itself was an image, so we relocated onto images that were iconic, that spoke, that everyone had seen in some way, tortured those images, repossessed them, and put them back out in a reanimated form. The word Nakoi means war, but not war of the battlefield, war as ordinary daily living. The actual etymology, if I can use that word, is each other kill many life.
Oh my God.
So I felt that would be an appropriate term to describe the Siamese twins of Nakoi Katsi of War and Religion.
At some point you said that our language, Western European languages, can no longer describe the world that we live in. What is the replacement of a failed language?
Well, let me
with
give a
images?
background to that comment. The comment was that our language no longer describes the world we live in. Now, of course, let's be clear, this is only a point of view.
Sure.
I'm not here to speak the truth. I'm here to only tell you what my shadow tells me. And having said that, the reason that's important is that I feel we see the world through language more than through our eyes. It is our language that makes us different makes us so human and animal, as it were, different from our other cousins in the form of the language that we have. If our language no longer describes the world in which we live, then we're not seeing the world that's there. If I may be biblical, biblical, we live in a world more real than true. So I wanted to make an effort to make a film more true than real. Our language has become antique. We're describing a world that's not here. Let's look at the U.S. Congress. What world are they living in? Where are they coming from? Or the New Mexico state legislature, who can hardly pass 2 or 3 laws in a whole session because of this ideological point of view, which is a language that has nothing to do with the truth of the world in which we live. So, having said that, let me offer to those that are listening tonight something you've already heard. Napoleon has this great dictum, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So I tried to take 1,000 pictures, metaphorically as it were, turn that statement on its head, and offer you 1,000 pictures that can give you the power of one word, Koyanis Katsi. Since we see the world through language, maybe we can adopt another way of looking at it through languages that do see the world in which we live in. And I would go, at the risk of being provocative, I would go to those that are more oppressed in our society, who see more the reality of day-to-day living, and have them help us see the world in which we live.
How did you come up with the arsenal of technique?
To put that into a context, in a theatrical film, the films that all of us see on TV or in the theater, about stories to be told, there's a foreground and a background. The foreground is the characterization, the plot, the story. So you can follow it so that it's meaningful to you. The background is maybe what you see as the cars driving from one place to the next, or the house in which the event takes place, or the field in which the event took place. What I wanted to do was switch those relationships. I wanted to take the foreground of conventional cinema, eradicate it, and take the background, second unit production, and make that as if we're shooting Greta Garbo.
God, I got it.
Because we, I'm sure the audience knows this term, genius loci. Yeah. All locations possess a voice. They can speak if you can listen. And so nature has a very high voice, as does the new nature that we've created, the technological universe that we live in. So if the foreground is eliminated, the background, which is usually just to, you don't even notice it, it's just part of the event, becomes the foreground, then the question becomes, how do you treat it? These films, as I said earlier, are an attempt to elicit the aesthetic triplets of sensation, emotion, and perception. So you have to do it through the form. In art, only form has meaning. In cinema, if you get rid of the convention of a story to be told, in other words, take it out of literature, of screenplay, and put it into a visual medium, then what are you dealing with? Motor speeds, lenses, where the camera is mounted, whether it's still or moving. All of those give you tremendous reach for the vocabulary of the visualization of the film. And so in the case of Koyaanisqatsi, the point of view of the film is that which is most present is that which is least seen. It's the forest for the tree. We live in a world that we're surrounded by, so it becomes ordinary. It is taken for granted. It's the assumption we make for the sake of our behavior. So how to see that? We've all seen traffic, but if you see traffic in a way that gives you another perspective on it, this is what art can help you do, change your perspective. I hate the word art because it's been hijacked by the market, but art is an attempt to touch people in a way that say something more practical can't do. And it's different for each person. So in the case of the films, using either slowed up footage, or if you want to, when you slow the footage down, there's an inverse relationship. So you shoot it very slow. When you project it, it's very fast on the screen. If you want to shoot it very fast, you shoot it extremely slow. It gives you a way of re-seeing something that you see every day, but you might see it then in a different way. So for example, in Powakatsi, the norm for cinema is 24 frames a second. Our norm was anywhere from 48 to 160 frames a second, because it allowed you to feel things from other people that in a moment you couldn't catch at 24 frames a second. So a way to manipulate time in terms of cinema in a very concrete way gives you another way of experiencing what we call time in a way of seeing the normal in an abnormal way.
I guess it was in the 70s, you made a powerful movie about privacy and propaganda, and the way the world is manipulated and the way we are manipulated by it.
What you're referring to is what's called the New Mexico Media Privacy Campaign, right. Done for the ACLU. It was done the campaign was in March of 1974, so that was 34 years ago. Everything that Snowden is revealing now was already beyond nascent form, in full bloom. Some of us felt that the use of technology to control behavior, the use of drugs to control kids like Ritalin in schools, psychosurgery in federal institutions, that most of our decision making on a government level was now through computer algorithms. All of that seemed like a very, very important issue at the time. So we did a full service public interest advertising campaign, did billboards at high traffic density areas all over Albuquerque and the state of New Mexico. We did television in prime time spots And that was really, in form, a precursor for me of the form used in the films, because it was all non-verbal. And it was done in a way that was inescapable. People are addicted to the medium. So if you have something on billboards, you can't not look at a billboard. You might not give it recognition, but it's looking at you as you go by. So in Albuquerque, we tried to put the billboard where there were clusters of billboards, because we designed a form that was in diametric opposition to the nature of commodity advertising, so that our billboard was given presence by virtue of the similarity of all the rest. Knowing that politicians do the right thing for the wrong reason, we scheduled it at the time right before the state's Democratic and Republican conventions. Sure enough, they adopted all of the issues from the campaign, because public opinion went from 14% to 63% in 3 weeks. So, for example, Manuel Lujan Sr., he sponsored with some other people in the U.S. Congress the elimination of psychosurgery in all federal institutions. Some school boards got rid of Ritalin as a way to treat hyperactive kids, and making them, by the way, drug addicted. So it did have, a very small effect, but it, for me personally, indicated a non-verbal form that could be extremely articulated.
As I'm watching these films, I'm thinking about the future. What are we looking forward to? Is there a way that we can talk to one another again, work with one another again, create with one another again?
If one believes that your world is your range of relationships, then yes. But if one buys into the fallacy of the globalized moment, here we are all together, one people, one way, one path, the blue planet, then we go through representative democracy, and we don't trust any politicians because they're interested in themselves. There are very few courageous souls anymore. Then, what do you do? The dynamic that drove those films was the deliberate attempt not to live in a rooted future. Nice. In cinema, if we live in a rooted future, then we repeat, no matter how brilliant, what has been done in the past. Now, being audacious, I wanted to have an uncreated future that we were going to work on. In other words, if you live in the rooted future, you know what the outcome is going to be in terms of the form. I wanted an uncreated future, which would allow us the freedom to create something, in my case, to shield ourselves from the blinding light of technology, so that in the darkness, through creativity, through form, we can create life and light. The world we live in is, complex. I certainly can't say that I'm grabbing a hold of the whole world. I have only a limited point of view. But I can tell you from my point of view, the way to resist destiny is through, the Greeks tell us, resistance, rebellion, and estrangement. Now think about those for a second. Our destiny is that which, through hubris, folly, produces fate. We are on a path, just a point of view, where our pride knows, in other words, we live in a world where we have an infinite tool that's operating on a finite planet. And we're creating a world out of that, and we are becoming off-planet as a result of that, in my opinion. So, how does one extricate themselves from it? You can't leave the world you're in. However, you can step out of it. You can be in the world, but not of it. If you don't get out of something that you then you become that thing. If you forget it, it remembers you. It's become normal. So to break with that, to resist it, to rebel against it, or to estrange yourself from it, allows you then to use your own consciousness rather than go through like a sleepwalk all the patterns that we've acculturated ourselves to.
When you talk to young people, how do you deal with their worry and their fear about the future?
I often tell young people that whatever you're interested in, I don't care what it is, commit yourself to that. Commit yourself to it not with grace and gratuity, but like to an insane asylum. Because otherwise, you're going to end up just making a living. You're going to end up spending all that time going to university or community college or training school in order to end up to make money. And that's not going to be a very fulfilling life. So whatever you can do or believe you can do, do it. Boldness has genius, magic, and power in it. Goethe said that in the 18th century. And that's what I try to tell people. I was a teacher at St. Mike's High School in Santa Fe for years, and I learned early on, by mistake, that the student is the efficient cause of education, not yours truly, the teacher. All I could do was facilitate and most of the time get in their way, and I believe that's the case today. So my advice to young people is to, if they could live in an uncreated future rather than in the rooted future, then they would have an opportunity to offer something. What I'm saying is that those people willing to say no to necessity can be free to pursue that which is within them. All of us have a voice within ourselves. We just have to believe it, and we can hear it, and it can lead us.
Watch the entire film, Coglione Scazzi, following this Colores.
Next time on Colores, longtime Albuquerque artist Nick Abdallah finds that process is the most important.
I've learned how to play again.
Sculptor Barbara Sorensen's work radiates with energy.
I like the mark of the artist to show. And I think as a result, there's a lot of energy that's infused in the work, just subconsciously.
Artist Howard Solomon creates his home reminiscent of a medieval castle. It is made from scraps.
When I look at a piece of scrap metal, or junk as we call it, it reminds me of something. It might look like a nose or an ear or a hand.
Musician Joe Powers received his first harmonica as a child, a gift that turned into a lifelong passion.
I really love the kind of music where I can close my eyes and I can make it my own.
Until next time, thank you for watching. Funding for Colores was provided in part by Frederick Hammersley Foundation.